The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. The novel follows Gregor Simpson, a young salesman who wakes up one day as a giant insect. When his family sees him, they react negatively, which causes personal and family issues. He starts feeling like a burden, which leads to his death, where his family feels relief and free to have a better future. I read this novel in my composition class sophomore year and thought it was a funny story, but it was full of hidden messages. The more I read it, the more I started feeling mixed emotions like curiosity and anger. The idea that people are only considered by others when they can be useful is a theme that's still present till this day. "It must be getting rid of," cried the sister. "That is the only way, Father. We must try to get rid of the idea that this is Gregor. The fact that we have believed for so long, that is truly our misfortune." "But how can it be Gregor? If it were Gregor, he would have long ago realized that a communal human life among human beings is not possible with such an animal and would have gone away voluntarily. Then we would not have a brother, but we could go on living and honor his memory. But this animal plagues us. It drives away the lodgers, will obviously take over the entire apartment, and leave us to spend the night in the alley. Just look, Father," she suddenly cried out. "He's already starting up again." With a fright which was totally incomprehensible to Gregor, the sister even let the mother push herself away from her chair as if she would sooner sacrifice her mother than remain in Gregor's vicinity, and rushed behind her father, who, excited merely by her behavior, also stood up and half raised his arms in front of the sister as though to protect her. For Gregor did not have any notion of wishing to create problems for anyone, and certainly not for his sister. He had just started to turn himself around in order to creep back into his room, quite a startling sight since, as a result of his suffering condition, he had to guide himself through the difficulty of turning around with his head, in this process lifting and banging it against the floor several times. He paused and looked around. His good intentions seemed to have been recognized. The fright had only lasted for a moment. Now they looked at him in silence and sorrow. His mother lay in her chair with her legs stretched out and pressed together. Her eyes were almost shut from weariness. The father and sister sat next to one another. The sister had set her hands around the father's neck. "Now perhaps I can actually turn myself around," thought Gregor, and began the task again. He couldn't stop puffing at the effort and had to rest now and then. Besides, no arm was urging him on. It was all left to him on his own. When he had completed turning around, he immediately began to wander straight back. He was astonished at the great distance which separated him from his room and did not understand in the least how in his weakness he had covered the same distance a short time before, almost without noticing it. Constantly intent only on creeping along quickly, he hardly paid any attention to the fact that no word or cry from his family interrupted him. Only when he was already in the door did he turn his head, not completely, but he felt his neck growing stiff. At any rate, he still saw that behind him nothing had changed. Only the sister was standing up. His last glimpse brushed over the mother, who was now completely asleep. Hardly was he inside his room when the door was pushed shut very quickly, both fast and barred. Gregor was startled by the sudden commotion behind him, so much so that his little limbs bent double under him. It was his sister who had been in such a hurry. She had stood up right away, had walked and had then sprung forward nimbly. Gregor had not heard anything of her approach. She cried out, "Finally!" to her parents as she turned the key in the lock. "What now?" Gregor asked himself, and looked around him in the darkness. He soon made the discovery that he could no longer move at all. He was not surprised at that. On the contrary, it struck him as unnatural that he had really been able up to this point to move around with these thin little legs. Besides, he felt relatively content. True, he had pains throughout his entire body, but it seemed to him that they were gradually becoming weaker and weaker and would finally go completely away. The rotten apple in his back and the inflamed surrounding area, entirely covered with white dust, he hardly noticed. He remembered his family with deep feeling and love. In this business, his own thought that he had to disappear was, if possible, even more decisive than his sister's. He remained in his state of empty and peaceful reflection until the tower clock struck 3 o'clock in the morning. From the window, he witnessed the beginning of the general dining outside. Then, without willing it, his head sunk all the way down, and from his nostrils flowed out weakly out his last breath. Thank you.